So we are live. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on exploring the new frontiers on food safety. And we are conducting this webinar to mark the occasion of World Food Safety Day that happened on 7th of June 2020. And we being us in this webinar tells how important it is for us to discuss food safety, especially in times of like evolution of technologies and urbanizations and how more markets are coming in. So to throw in some stats, the World Bank report of 2018 states that to treat foodborne illnesses alone in low and middle income countries, nearly 15 billion US dollars are being spent, which is a huge amount. And as a part of this industry, I feel it is our responsibility to elevate this situation and build a strong food safety network. So, post publishing of food safety and standard regulations in 2011, FSSAI has come a long way, but still, I think it is still in its nascent stage. So it is important that we discuss how we are going to do and how we can reach a point where we could have and consume a safe and wholesome food. So to discuss about the state of affairs and how things are going to be, we have Dr. BalKumar Mathi, who is professor at GITAM University and director of Center for Health and Wellness Innovation. He has strong technical and research foundation, which accounts for nearly 30 plus years of industrial experience, and a lot of it is with Unilever. We also have Ms. Anusha Bhushan, who's the founder and CEO of Smoodies, which is a wellness beverage company and which offers great nutrition, good taste, and also uncompromising brand values as well. And also, finally, we have Ms. Sarika Agarwal, our managing director and principal consultant. Ms. Sarika Agarwal has been in this industry way before the food regulations have been implemented, and she has seen how the industry is being evolved in close quarters. And thank you everyone for joining us. And with such a spectacular and versatile panel team, I think this webinar is going to be a great success, and everybody who is watching this live will take something out from this webinar today. I'm definitely sure about it. So before that, people who are watching, there is a question and answer session at the end. So please make sure you come up with some questions then and there, so that it will be easy for us to compile at the end. And also don't forget to mention the panel name, so it will be easy for us to ask them. So shall we start? Everybody? Yeah. So first, let's start on hearing our panel's views for 5 minutes on how they started, where are we right now, and what their views. So we will start with Dr. BalKumar Mathi. To you, sir.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Surabhi. Thank you, Ramesh and Sarika, for inviting me. This is quite an interesting event, and let's hope that we can go away from here with some concrete directions for each one of us. Uh, I mean, when you talk about food safety in these days, so in today's environment, it's inevitable that you talk about the pre-pandemic and post-pandemic kind of situation. It's almost always going to be what happened before and what is going to happen in the future. Now, what has happened before has been really about setting up these kind of global supply chain systems that require a whole deal of intensive food safety management. And as the industry standard, safety by design, where you try to design in safety right from the formulation all the way up to the final use and disposal of the product, and that safety by design principle has served us very well in the sense that we have been able to manage food safety. After all, food safety is about management. It's not about saying a guarantee 100%, but it's about managing within the scope of the kinds of products you made, the kinds of environment that you are working in. Uh, we've also seen, in the broader context, global supply chains evolve. We're not surprised anymore to see that you may have a raw material coming from one part of the world and being packed and sold in another part of the world. So what is happening is any issue that comes up affects the entire supply chain, and it makes it even more complicated sometimes to address a problem, and also to actually ensure that your entire chain is robust and in good condition. Now, what is happening now? What changes? What do I think, or what do we think that changes in with the pandemic happening, and also post the recovery, when we actually start going back to normal, or whatever the normal is going to be, what is going to happen in the food supply chain? We need to take a broader look at it. It's about the context of food in general and food supply in general. We're talking about where we need to build in systems for food production, manufacture, and distribution, which are very resilient, which can tackle any unforeseen circumstances. This pandemic is a huge global event. What happens if the next one comes about? What happens if there's another natural disaster? So, what we have learned from the pandemic over the last 3 or 4 months is that, first of all, food systems need to adapt. Secondly, they've adapted quite well, actually, if you look at what happens here. And thirdly, it's going to have a lot of impact on how food manufacturers are going to now interact with the environment, the consumers, etc. Before, we were talking more about safe foods that are good for you, that are good for the environment, that are healthy, that are nutritious, etc. All that still remains. But now the focus is going to be on how are you going to manage when a global food supply chain doesn't work as well as it should. Okay, I can't source raw materials from say China. What do I do? So what we have seen during this pandemic is that, okay, your supply chains are shrunk, so you're looking for very short supply chains, very short time intervals, for example, to get material in, process it, and then sell it. We have an issue in terms of safety within the factory. So all the COVID related personal hygiene, safety, and medical precautions that you need to take are going to change the way we make foods. We still don't, although COVID is not transmitted by foods, we still don't know what could happen in case the virus gets into a food. There's a contamination with the virus. There's the chances of infections happening are very low according to the experts, but certainly studies have shown that the SARS virus and the COVID virus specifically survive quite well at -20 for a pretty long time. Do they really cause a problem is an issue. So I don't want people to start panicking that there's going to be food related. There is no evidence. There is absolutely none for that. But what we need to look at is how do we manage if, let's say, with one third of your workforce being allowed to work? Yeah, is it going to be the new normal? Is it going to come back to 100% of your factory personnel working? We don't know. We need to work to see what are the alternates to your ingredients, to your processing aids, and to the way you manufacture. You need to look very, very, very carefully at how consumers are now going to interact. What is the way that you're going to deliver it? Is it retail? Is it delivery? Is it online delivery, or is it a recipe that is sent to you, or is it a pre-prepared food that goes to you? We don't know. Now we get delivery of prepared foods to our houses. Tomorrow, if a consumer says, "I don't really want to go because I'm risking something, so I want to get this particular entree from restaurant one, I want to get a dessert from restaurant two, and I want to get an appetizer from restaurant three because I like these things from the three different restaurants." Delivery companies will adapt. How do we adapt? And how do we, as food safety professionals, look at what are the challenges that come up during this kind of change? Are we going to be able to? Is it going to be better for us, more easy for us to handle food safety issues because the supply chains have grown shorter, but they've become more complex? how are we going to make sure that people get the fresh food that they want? What are the issues that we need to deal with? Not only do we have short supply chains, we also have short recovery times, and we have short kind of demand times are also reducing. So can we get the right kind of food safety procedures in place? I don't have any concrete answers other than saying that our systems, our approaches are robust. We need to adapt them, and we need people to think very carefully. People like ourselves as the experts to think very carefully about how am I going to manage safe food in an environment where everything has changed. We started out from just making bulk continuous manufacture in the 50s or so, when quality wasn't important. Then quality safety came in, and then we adapted, and adapted. I think we'll do the same now, and with the added advantage, or if you will, a challenge or an inspiration to say that we need to be so resilient that we can supply the right kinds of food to the right people. We don't know what foods are going to become more important. Maybe frozen foods are going to come back with a bang, because frozen is now the closest that you have to save fresh foods. Yeah, so we don't know that. We don't know whether people are going to look for minimally processed foods, whether they're going to look for convenience versus functionality, etc. Having said that, about functionality, we're now getting into a lot of functional foods and nutraceuticals, and the pharma industry is coming in. And the thing that's happening there is they're bringing in a pharma kind of thinking, which means that I want to put an ingredient, I want to put it in a capsule, and I want to sell it. So it's not a food, it's more of a supplement that I give. Now, what is the relationship between that and food safety? How do you make sure that the ingredients that we put in the functional foods are safe for you? How do we formulate them? Now it's the product formulator's job to formulate a very exciting product so that is also good for you, but it's your job as a food safety professional to ensure that the design that somebody comes up with is safe. So all these new challenges are being thrown at us, and we need to be able to adapt. And I think we're flexible enough because our systems are flexible enough. So that's my 2 cents worth.
That was an excellent opening statement. And on supply chain, I think even government now is focusing on by adding it by changing an amendment in the Essential Commodities Act as well. And I think we will have a stronger supply chain coming forth years. So next, would like to ask Anusha to give her speck of knowledge from an entrepreneurial way and heading a company which uses no preservatives at all. So to you, Anusha.
Thanks, Ruby. Morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the micro in terms of what do we do as a business today? What have we done during the pandemic, and what were we doing prior as well? See, I see food safety as something that is relevant across every sphere of life today, and particularly because of this pandemic. If you take the entire kind of value chain from farming to manufacturing, processing to retailing to serving food in restaurants and outlets, I would say prior to COVID, food safety was not necessarily an area that had been prioritized across all of these segments of the value chain. However, absolutely everything that we do, right from farming practices to the way we serve it and what we eat, that impacts our health. And despite the fact that it is because of this pandemic, it is good to see that this is now becoming the center of attention for all stakeholders in this industry. So the way we look at food safety, and this was sort of prior to COVID as well, is there is the element of microbiological safety. That is, is the food that you're consuming today, the food that we're making today, is it going to make you sick tomorrow? Is it contaminated? Is it free of heavy metals, pesticides, other unwanted matter? And of course, now, is it also free of COVID? Is it safe from a consumption perspective? And for me, that is basic hygiene. That is something that we have, in fact, every manufacturer, every single person today involved in the value chain should be looking at answering those questions and making sure that anything that they're making today or selling is safe. And then there's the additional part, which is actually what has defined us as a brand, which is holistic safety, right? So are the products that you're eating today or that you're making, are they naturally healthy for the consumer? So will they have long-term impact on health either because of its intrinsic health benefits or possibly because of its detrimental effects. Maybe because people are adding in additives, they're adding in synthetic, sort of artificial ingredients. And this is where our brand values kick in. And this is what sort of defined how we look at our products and what we sell to our consumers. So we have very strict brand values that govern our approach to formulation, as well as processing specifications and the conditions in which we process. So we add no sugar and no preservatives, and we deliver a natural and a healthy product to our consumers. That's the core of absolutely everything that we do. We establish these brand values as a part of our belief that there is a growing demand for products in the market today, for products for holistically healthy, safe products in the consumer mind. And that is not only because of what kind of ingredients you're adding in the product, but also the kind of ingredients that you're leaving out. And for us today, the list of sort of no's will be no sugar, no preservatives, no added flavors, no added colors. We see additives as an unnecessary in at least in our product portfolio, and so that's something that we stay out of entirely. And so a lot of this is stuff that we've been doing in prior to COVID as well, and in a way, because of how much care we have to take with our products because we don't add preservatives. During the pandemic, there have been a lot of different things that we've already implemented, which have helped us ensure that our products are safe. So one, we have very strong supplier relationships, and typically our suppliers are all actually local, or at least local to India, so that the sort of length of supply chain that we were talking about just before this has sort of been of an advantage. And I think we are seeing a lot of brands now trying to establish local supply chain just to eliminate that risk. It also helps, I think, again, in a scenario like this, to sort of know where your food is coming from. And as a manufacturer, it helps to know where your raw materials are coming from. We also test our raw materials regularly. It's in a way, it is to monitor for things like what is the initial microbial load of a product before we run it through our bottling process. And we test, it's a natural product, so we test for taste, texture, color, acidity levels, Brix levels, absolutely everything on finished products. And this is sort of the part which has really stood us in good stead. We have always ensured that we have a relatively shelf stable product, and the way we've done that is we have maintained absolute standards of hygiene in our plant. And I think that is now something that people will have to absolutely ensure that they do. This is not just about establishing controls in your plant to say that I have an HVAC running or I have pure air running, but you have to ensure that every single person in your plant is trained, is educated to know the risks of COVID or the risks of just poor hygiene, right? If yesterday it was important to wash your hands before handling a food product, today it's important to wash your hands for 20 seconds and sanitize after that. It is also important to ensure that you're responsible not just within your production unit, but you're also responsible when you go home, because it's the nature of the pandemic today. And I think that has been something that India will struggle with, and I hope we get over it soon, which is the risk that people bring to the food industry. We are so heavily dependent on manual processes that if you do have a contained area where you have 20 people working and one of them has COVID, one of them is not well, you do put the entire unit at risk. And those are things that all companies are figuring out, hopefully have figured out. How do you make your unit safe for your people, and hence your food, your packaging safe for your consumers today? And interestingly, I think businesses were not really focused so much on anything but what is inside their packaging. And I actually find it fascinating that now people are having to focus on the outside of their product as well. They're having to focus on how do we distribute products today. Not only trying to set up new supply chains, but also ensuring that the people delivering them are safe, they're an extension of the company today. And so it's, in a way, the sphere of responsibilities for a company selling its products today has significantly expanded.
Thank you, Anusha. And seeing as a consumer, you speak and about food safety so passionately. It is such a relief and so nice to hear. Um, we'll move on to Sarika, ma'am. Please share your insights into the food industry in general and how it has perceived food safety by the industry.
Thank you, Survi. Good morning. Food safety for India, comparatively, it's still a new subject to the industry. So prior to 2011, if we look at, it was more of the export houses, the MNCs, and the suppliers to the MNCs. Who were talking about the standards, the food hygiene, safety, and all of those. So even after like the regulation we published, we took quite a while to realize that this is going to stay with us. The hygiene part is something that we have to consider it, for a long run, and it's with us. So we have to, we have a challenge. Having say that, saying like we have a lot of unorganized sector with us, so that adds a lot of complexity to implementing these regulations. So however, we have come a long way. We had started with a notion saying like having hygiene is good, and it was good to hear Anusha to saying like hygiene is an integral part to what we do today. So the new generation who's coming in has realized, saying like it's pretty important to establish, the hygienes, and they are able to correlate the good manufacturing practices, which helps them to increase the shelf life of their product. So now, the food business operators actually have started looking at the designing, layout part, making that as a key element to ensure that the food that's produced in their premises are safe. They are willing to invest in the new technologies to make sure the systems are not bypassed. Everybody coming into the system follow these protocols that's been set up. It's not like, I do remember the incidents where people used to saying like, why are we given a cap to wear? And then they used to saying like, hamare baal gande ho jayenge. So that was where we all started long back, saying like, see, the cap is given so that your head isn't spoiled. No. So they didn't understand saying like a hair can be a hazard in your food. So looking at that, we have for sure the management has started investing in the technologies to make sure people are aware in the business. They are trained enough to understand food safety. And if we are looking at today, for sure, everybody is to looking at scale up their businesses. And again, going back to the times when we just started in 2009, Barbecue Nation was one of the first engagements that we had. And they had started with 3 restaurants, and today they are like more than 145 restaurants just in a matter of 10 years. So if you look at a scaling business, if you don't have your robust processes, systems in place, it's pretty difficult for you to have the systems in and around setting up your businesses, scaling up your businesses. So with that, if there is a high risk, if you don't have your effective FSMS systems, the food safety management systems in place, when you're running small operations, I think pretty much it's okay. You know your suppliers, you know your visitors, you know your customers, the number of customer complaints, you can address them personally, you know where your product has gone through. But as you start scaling, it becomes pretty difficult for you to have, managing all your systems and processes. So looking at all of those, the management does understand saying like they need professional help, to assist in having the systems in place. So, yep, so hygiene, food safety has become a key, and hand wash is something that I think we all understand how important is that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sarika. Uh, yeah, sure. Especially with hand wash, I think whenever we used to train food handlers, and people used to say, "What you teach about hand washing and stuff?" And I think now everybody understands how important hand washing is. And to add on to you, we will start with asking questions, and I will shoot my first question, which is an obvious question in current times. So, what do you think has been effect of COVID-19 on the overall food safety scenario? To Sarika, actually. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so we all do know saying like COVID-19 is something where food is not a carrier, right? So in general, when we know food is not carrier, but human to human is something where the COVID-19 can pass on. So the overall awareness in people about the food safety and hygiene, the personal hygiene, you have to maintain your hygiene, you have to make sure you are wearing your mask, you are washing your hands, right, has increased overall. We have been trying for last, I think, number of years to make sure everybody understands the washing of hand. But then, yeah, I think COVID-19 did that work pretty easily, making sure people do understand how to wash their hands, when to wash their hands. This COVID-19 is a pandemic which affects the whole population. Unlike the other outbreaks like your swine flu, bird flu, which were at a lower impact and not on, improving the awareness level. But now, as people are getting aware, and as BalKumar said, saying like people have started asking, saying like, where is my produce coming from, right? So everybody, every consumer is now worried to and wants to know how is my product being produced, who has handled it, what are the necessary precautionary things that as a FBO anybody has taken up. So this forces the business to take a note and put systems and processes in place. So lot of them, yes, as Anusha was mentioning as well, people have started putting things in place. Few are still figuring it out. Few businesses are still opening up, like our restaurateurs are still opening up, right? So they are trying to figure out, saying like, what are the new normal during the COVID-19? What are the precautionary things that everybody needs to take care of to ensure the customer is having a safe product for their consumption. So if I have to say on a personal front, actually I'm happy that we no longer have to teach food handlers how to wash their hands. So what we for the last 10 years we've been trying to teach them this to the food handlers, and have not been able to move them beyond that. So hopefully, yes, it's made our life easier one way or the other to make sure they wash their hands. We have to definitely look at different ways of how we can ensure the food safety is further handled. Yep.
Thank you. And I think not only that, when I'm training, what one point that I found difficult was to make them understand what is a microorganism is. So since microorganism is naked to eye, so something which they have not seen, so it was very difficult to make understand them on microbiological front. And I think Corona has even opened our that window of microorganisms to the world of
Yes.
people who are not. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, we had few people coming back and saying, you know what, all my laborers are going back, the migrant workers. The reason behind, they just heard saying like, you are going to die, so nothing is going to get ended till December. So yeah, so it's important they understand the microorganisms and
Organisms.
the food safety around it.
Thank you. So next question is to Ms. Anusha. So, what have been your challenges in implementing some of the requirements in your establishment, especially in terms of food safety?
So I think what's been a sort of challenge to implement overall has been to maintain a degree of control and safety around the movement of our teams. And so we are a sort of end to end. We control our supply chain end to end. So we manufacture, we also distribute. So our own teams are even facing not only our retailers but also doing direct deliveries to consumers. So I think, and this is probably something that most companies have faced, is educating our team, and as you said, as you very rightly said, actually educating our team on what is COVID, right? And the only way to really convince somebody that it is very, very important to enforce sanitization protocols and just be safe and wear a mask all the time is to have them understand how they can catch it, and how they can give it to somebody else as well if they have it. So, I mean, so we've done a whole host of different things in our unit as well. So, of course, no visitors allowed anymore unless they're authorized. We record temperatures of people coming in and out of our factory. Of course, any raw materials that do come in, we actually sanitize the outer packaging before it enters our unit. Our surfaces within the manufacturing unit are now sanitized sort of 4 to 6 times a day, depending on the length of the shift. Finished goods are now cleaned with sort of extra care prior to delivery. It's a whole host of different things that we've had to implement across the chain. Today we're reasonably small, which means we also have a lot of manual interventions throughout our process, which means the more manual processes you have, the more you have to also ensure that your people who are undertaking those processes are also being safe. So that's been, broadly, that's been our challenge. We have also, though, we have in, thanks to Sarika and team, we have a fairly strong culture of record keeping. So we've managed to sort of checklist a lot of these new responsibilities that our team, our production team, and quality team has into process. So these are just things now that we've gotten used to doing. It's just part of the day now. When you come in, you can't enter without a temperature check. We have checklists to ensure that our surfaces are cleaned regularly. And I think it's the new normal. I don't see this going away.
Thank you, Anusha. And it is also, like as you said, it is also very important to have more consultancy firms like us, and the importance of consultancy firms in terms of establishing food safety in entrepreneur starting businesses as well. So, on to you, Mr. BalKumar, Mathi sir. So you have worked you have worked for a very large company like Unilever, and laying food safety management systems in such establishment is different. But when most of it is shared by micro enterprises and home entrepreneurs. So how do we stabilize this? How do we bring in food safety culture in a market that is owned by small enterprises and home entrepreneurs?
I think the challenges are surprisingly similar. Just because you have a big company doesn't mean that the challenges are different, or they can do it better. Because you're always dealing with the smaller manufacturers. You have toll manufacturers, you have third-party units. These toll manufacturers are actually sometimes making products for three different companies. And the point being, as a big company, you can have a lot of knowledge. You can afford to spend a lot of money to develop a lot of knowledge, systems, procedures. So you have that kind of advantage, and that advantage is something that we try to pass on to all our smaller partners. But ultimately, it's what happens at the ground level, which is at the factory where you're where you're manufacturing, whether it's your own factory, whether it's a factory belonging to a third party, and it's the very same challenges that Anusha has talked about. That you have to ensure that they follow. So it's not very difficult. I think the only advantage a company like Unilever has is scale and money and a lot of knowledge. And some of that knowledge goes into better formulations, but also it goes into better kind of systems in place. But ultimately, the challenges we have are very similar. So I don't see that big companies have as smaller companies are more agile, so they can actually implement things much faster than big companies. You you cannot imagine how much conflict there is when you say spend some capital money to get some assets into a factory. It's the same problem everywhere.
Okay. So coming back to you, Anusha. So as you're growing, what do you think will be the most critical aspects that you would like to invest on to improve food safety?
So one of the points on our roadmap is to include increasing amounts of automation as we proceed. The less manual intervention there is, the less scope there is for error, whether it is in today's times of this pandemic or even prior. There are in food processing, I think we would like to focus on sort of, especially at the critical control points, ensuring that as our volumes grow, our error rate remains or reduces actually and remains close to negligible. And we think that automation is the key to that. So for example, for our process, it would be automated filling, automated sort of capping, maybe sort of automated mixing. That is our first point of investment actually, the moment we can. Given our brand values, so I think another aspect of food safety that we would love to focus on is ensuring we have more visibility and direct involvement in our raw material harvesting. So as we scale, we'd also love to be able to work with our farmers on sustainable farming practices, and just have a little bit more visibility in terms of, how are our fruits grown, how are they ripened, is it done safely. Today, after sort of receiving the product, we send it for tests, so that we're sure on our end that what we're using is safe. But a much better way to do that would be to actually be able to impact how farmers are actually growing the fruit that we use.
So adding on to that, I would like to ask Ms. Sarika, how much an automation, bringing in automation and lessening the human intervention could be making us move towards food safety? How much is possibilities there, and what will be the cons of it?
Okay. So with the automation, for sure, you're not person dependent. Anybody who knows how to run your machines could be able to do that. Today, we are pretty much with your manual, interventions, the quality, the safety is at a risk. With automation, it's much more easier because, it's just about the machine getting touched. People are not touching your product. The productivity goes higher. It's about the scheduled cleaning of your machineries, but not one to one at every time. So yeah, that's what it is. Automation for sure gets you to a larger scale and much more confidence.
Okay, while we are still with you, what do you think about the ever-changing regulations in this space? What standards you think that are going to drive better food safety?
It doesn't matter basically which standard or regulation we are talking about. They're only going to be more elaborate and tighter as we go ahead. We can see new categories of products being added, new standards will have to come in. The nutraceutical regulation, which came in 2016, the organic regulation that came in 2017, and the more recent one on the e-commerce that just has come in. So the new ingredients which has to be regulated, finding more medical research have to be translated into standards. We're talking about the functional foods that BalKumar, Anusha, both we're talking about. So we have to, so a whole lot of tighter standards, more elaborate standards will be coming in. Banning of few of the additives like we did recently in 2015-16 of potassium bromide additive to the bread. So we did see FSMA coming in, wherein the FDA started inspecting their supplier under the supplier verification program. So that is where we can look at blockchain, saying like when we are globally well connected, it becomes very, very important for us to make sure we are at the same page. So we can't leave our suppliers. They are the raw material providers. So it becomes very important to make sure the standards are developed, are more stringent. So with the FSMA coming in, we have seen the ISO 22000 coming up with a new version of 2018 with additional requirements to put together the food fraud, the risk assessment, saying like you need to analyze your risk through the systems, not only your hazards, but again, your supplier risk, how much risk you are at. With that, again, we have a new version with the FSSC coming up, syncing in with the ISO 22000. So things are moving everywhere, and India will move in lockstep with the harmonized standards. So yeah, that's where we are.
Thanks for painting a beautiful, the evolutionary processes that is happening in food safety. And staying with regulations and regulatory bodies, I would like to ask Mr. Balkumar. In December, FSSAI tested about 6,000 plus milk samples, and nearly 10% of it didn't comply with the regulations. So, what do you think, looking at the microbiological aspect of it? You think this is expected that 10% is not it is not very small amount. It is still a large thing. And is FSSAI doing enough in terms of testing products and the frequency of doing it?
Well, 10% is actually very low, if you ask me. I'm surprising. If their results say 10%, then there's actually a lot more contamination. In testing is extremely notoriously unreliable, and I really don't think any regulation should be based on testing, except for a very few cases where testing is a good way of setting regulations. For me, FSSI should really, like Sarika was pointing out, is to really start embracing risk assessment, science-based risk assessments, to understand what the risks are, and then allow preventive measures to be included rather than using testing. Testing is just a verification that whatever you do is working. It doesn't ever give you a guarantee. It only allows you to sleep that one night when you get the results, but the next day when you have a problem, those tests are not going to say anything, because you may have full-blown incidents and you still get very, very large numbers of negatives. So I think best is, and that's what we've been also been trying to push with CII and SHIFT's Center for Food Safety that Hindustan Lever set up, is that how can we get science-based risk assessments into the domain of FSSAI, so they start looking at risk assessments, how companies do that, help companies do risk assessments, and then use that as a way of product and process clearances. Yeah. So for me, testing is not really something I believe in as much. Does that
It's
answer your
true.
question?
Yeah, it's true that we have to identify what is the root cause analysis and to entirely remove it rather than just keep on testing. Yeah, in that point, yeah, it is definitely just testing is not good enough. Sure.
Because it is
And
expensive, and if it doesn't give you the outcome you are looking for, then you're spending a whole lot of money on doing unnecessary testing. When you could when you could divert that attention and that resource to something better. Like, rather than testing incoming samples, like Anusha mentioned, you go and make sure that the farmer practices the right protocols, and then that way you have better assurance that what you're getting in is of the right quality. And in fact, that kind of approach should be rewarded by the regulations, and should be part of the regulations.
So, staying with Mr. BalKumar, so how do you see the national and international standards change in the near future? Is there?
Uh, I don't I don't see much change happening in terms of standards. I see a lot of standards going towards this whole performance-based and a risk-based preventive approach in terms of food safety. Yes, there are situations when you have some kind of an incident. I'm not talking about the pandemic. I'm talking about food safety incident, big incident in a country like the US or somewhere else, and then you have a knee-jerk reaction to saying, I'm going to set up something very, very strict. But ultimately, it's more or less established that these kinds of preventive measures are the ones that will work. Yeah. People will have maybe more controls in terms of how they monitor. So FISMA is an example where it's basically taken the same kind of approach that was there before, renamed some of the items, made it a little more rigorous, and in terms of monitoring and inspection. But the basic principle is still of preventing, still of not just saying we will test everything that is inside. Now, having said that, there are, especially in terms of microbiological contamination, with the advent of genomic technologies, they've become so cheap now, where you can get a genome identified, an organism identified through its genome in a few hours. That might give a fillip to testing. I don't know. And people will do a lot more tests, but still, it doesn't solve the problem. They are very well. There's great value in those kinds of tests to do tracking and tracing. So in that kind of situation, yes, these testing procedures work. But in general, you need to have a preventive approach with very focused and limited testing.
Thank you. Going over to Anusha, uh, what do you think of these changing standards and regulations, and what are your coping strategies for that?
So this might sound idealistic, but I think that if you're like as a manufacturer, if you're truly committed to food safety and in a way, if you look at the regulations and you sort of look at the spirit of the rules that have been laid down, a changing regulatory framework should not be too difficult to cope with. Because if you look at any changes that have come in over the last few years, most of them just seem to push food manufacturers into the right direction, with respect to sort of more transparency with the consumer, healthier products, safer manufacturing processes, and as Mr. Balkumar said, I mean, even the regulations today are about preventing a food safety incident, and so in a way, it's about self-regulation. Uh, Today, you might have a rule that sort of tells you that you need to test X amount more than you were before, or Y additive is not allowed anymore. Fact is that if it's not good, if it's classified as unsafe, then no manufacturer should be using it, regardless of whether the rule tells you you can or you can't. So I take a very idealistic approach to it, and I think that also comes from the fact that none of the ingredients that we use today will actually ever be sort of, let's say, banned by the FSSAI, or none of our processes today are questionable at all. So maybe it's easier for me to say it. Um, but overall, if a business is committed to food safety, then a changing regulatory framework should not be too difficult to manage.
So, staying on with you, Anusha, I thought of asking, apart from being this mandatory regulations that you have to follow, I think Smoodies is also an ISO certified company. So, as an entrepreneur, how do you think that bringing in some voluntary FSMS management system is opening your market? So, how is this? How that FSMS is helping you in venturing into markets which has so many competitors?
So the reason why we went for the ISO certification in the first place is as a small brand today, we are aspiring to scale, and we are scaling. And a part of that scale is also being able to access the kind of customers today that demand documentation for your quality processes. We've always been committed to quality right from the start, but I think certifications are important to establish that you have had an external auditor come in and check and validate that you are doing everything that you say you're doing. And that's kind of what the ISO got us there. So it has opened the doors for a fair number of customers today who have asked for it, who said, I'd like to see your food safety certifications. But overall, I think the ISO has also brought in a lot of process rigor. We felt that we were very committed to quality before we had ISO. Once we went through the entire process, and we had to change a couple of things that we do. We realized how important it is to actually go through that process to understand what the highest benchmarks of quality are and should be. And that has made a difference, I think, in terms of consistency in quality of our product. And I think that's something, again, that's helped us build a recognition amongst consumers in the market, that anything that comes out of the Smoodies factory is consistently good.
True. Any consumer would like commitment that food business operator is taking towards food safety. So, finally, coming back to you, Sarika. So, what do you think as a consultant's role in the ever-changing scenario? Also, when do you think that this overall food safety scenario will be stabilized?
So I want to answer the second question first. When will this stabilize? So not anytime soon, for sure. Yeah. So we basically are a very young country with a new regulation. So we just had this for last 9 years, right? That we have been working on it. So there is a lot of learning that has to go in. We are a nation, second thing, with a huge diversity of food. So from north to south, from east to west. So every states have their own, staples type of food. So with a huge diversity and produce that we have, it's going to take a whole lot of time, and it's tied into our history tradition. So regulating everything in our country is going to be a real tricky thing to handle. So now coming on to our role, basically we are really a bridge between the regulators and industry. So we do help translate the high level requirements into action items for the industry. And at the same time, we do provide the feedback to the regulators on the difficulties that the industry is facing in implementing the regulation that has been outlined. So we also act as the technical evaluators for the standards that have been put in place by providing feedback on the draft regulation. So every standard that comes published, they do have a timeline wherein the comments are taken. So we do put in a lot of time and effort to make sure we give our feedbacks as a consultant. So by virtue of working with different multiple verticals of the industry, we are better able to anticipate the problems for various stakeholders. So we do work for manufacturing, the catering units, the restaurateurs. So we work with different verticals. So that helps us to, better know the problems, anticipate the problems, saying like what would be there for the various stakeholders. So we can provide this view without the fear of retaliation. So I think we are a critical part in the complete ecosystem, right? So yeah, so that's what it's about. So we do help to bridge the gaps basically. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarika. And I think from my side, we will wrap up this conversations right now, and we will move on to answering few questions from viewers. So I think you can start posting questions if you have any. Please don't forget to mention to whom you want to ask the question. So right now we have one question, and there is no panel has been mentioned. I think anybody who wishes can take it. So it is from Bushra Ahmed. Are we allowed to distribute sanitizers to our consumer? Is it mandate to have license?
So I can go ahead on that, saying like there's no mandate. You are allowed to give the sanitizers to to your consumers. Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yes.
providing sanitizers, I don't know which industry are you in. So if you are talking for a restaurant type of business or a delivery type of business, then it's something that you, because of the COVID-19, it makes it mandate that the personal hygiene of the people or your customers coming in, make sure the sanitizers are available for them to sanitize their hands. Mandate, it's something, during the COVID-19, you have to take care of it. Yeah.
Thank you. And so I didn't get another question. So I thought I will ask some questions from my side maybe. So I think I'll ask this to Ms. Sarika itself. So customers being the important stakeholders in this food supply chain, and what do you think about the participation from consumers and how well are we doing with awareness?
Uh, if we look at it, the consumers, the customers are definitely becoming aware. We can tell you that from our experience, we do get a number of calls saying like, see, hey, I have this problem, that has come into my product and all those things. So consumers, the customers are definitely becoming more and more aware. There is more transparency. They do know today where to go and put in their complaint. So and consumers are also, being in the internet world, they do a Google search, they do know a whole lot about it now.
Okay. Still, I didn't get any questions from viewers. So maybe I'll ask another question to Mr. BalKumar. So, in World Food Organization, what they are saying is that they are talking about sustainable agriculture and food security as a important part towards moving towards food safety. So this whole bringing in food security thing as an important factor to move towards food safety. How do you process about it?
Food security is probably the most critical thing. If you can't provide foods to people, and can't provide healthy and safe foods to people around the world, then you do have a problem. So yeah, I think food safety is part of security, in my opinion. So once we take care of sustainable production and make sure that the security and resilience of your food systems that I talked about at the beginning are taken care of, then food safety also follows within that. You can't have secure food supply if it is not safe. Because one of the aspects of a secure food supply is safety. So whether it is to remote parts of the world, whether it is to parts where there is lack of food, etc., it's very, very important.
True.
Yeah,
So
so
we have
just to add on to it, I think because of the pandemic, the exports and the imports was at least at a stall, and due to that, the countries who are not a great producer like us were into a problem. So I think Korea was one of the country which had a big food security problem.
And we should also remember one more thing is that as we move towards alternate sources of food, like for example, if it's from meat to plant-based protein, whether it is insect-based protein, and also moving away from your traditional commodities, whether it is wheat, rice, or corn. Now, these three crops account for what, 60-70% of the uh, uh, consumption in the whole world. At one point, it's going to be a problem. We need to look at alternate sources of nutrition, of protein, of carbohydrate, micronutrients, whatever. If there are new plants, new super plants, new super nutritional sources coming about, we need to look at what are the food safety issues. I'm not talking just of microbiology, talking of toxicology and chemical contamination issues. That then feeds into the food security. Suddenly the demand goes up. How are you going to ensure that there's enough manufacturing capacity available and or agricultural capacity available that you can grow these kinds of foods? So a lot of new things that will take our attention in the future as we move.
So this is the final question. So let's wrap it up with this. So it is from Sudhir Kaushal to Mr. BalKumar. There is mandate from FSSAI to get testing of processed water, finished goods, and raw material done. So he has put this as a comment. I think a question on your comment on testing. So do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, don't take my comment on testing as a universal. I did say that there are exceptions, and these are indeed the exceptions. Your processed water has to be of the right quality and safety, so you have to test it for not only microbiological contaminants, but also chemical contaminants and physical contaminants. Similarly, for some products. Now, while we espouse the cause of preventive food safety, for example, in some products like chilled products or meats or some vegetables, even we say that we should have no salmonella present in the product or no listeria, and that is not just in the product, but that is in the entire chain, right from the raw materials. So although we might say that there is no we are emphasizing on prevention, the issues with certain contaminants like salmonella, listeria are so severe that we have to make sure that you actually don't bring them into the environment. So there are exceptions, like I said, where testing is required, and where they are mandated, you have to follow them. Yeah, doesn't mean that all products have finished product testing. And if FSSAI says that every single product that you make has to have a finished product set of tests to be done, then that's something that needs to be looked at, in my opinion. Others may not agree, but it's in my opinion.
And also that's just a verification mode that you're sending your samples for testing. It's not a preventive mode. You still have to have a system of prevention, whether it's a water or your, food items that you are using for your manufacturing. So what FSSAI says is still a verification mode, and it's always good to have a verification mode, like your internal audits or your external audits. So similarly, testing is also your verification. So you need to have those systems at least in place.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
So I hope you got your answer, Mr. Sudhir. So we are running out of time, so we will end up this session with any final remarks from our panel. Mr. BalKumar, do you have anything to add?
Not really, but basically let us all be flexible in how we apply systems, apply the right science-based systems, make sure that you don't do a hazard-based set of processes and controls, more risk-based, and ultimately it's something that every one of us who's involved in the food safety domain has to take care of. It's not one or the other who's responsible, it's everyone responsible. So that's my conclusion.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Anusha, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I think food safety is the order of the day today, and a lot of companies have put a whole bunch of protocols in place to combat the pandemic, and let's hope that some of these stick, and even post the pandemic, the industry is better off, compared to what it was before.
Thank you, Anusha. Ms. Sarika, do you have to say anything? Yeah.
So food safety being everybody's business, it's not just the food business operators' responsibility, but the from starting from the producer to the transporter to the producer, the retailer, the warehousing, storage, transport guy. So it becomes a joint responsibility of everybody to make sure the food that is produced and consumed is safe.
Thank you, everyone. The best thing about this webinar, according to me, is that we had a versatile panel and we got to look about food safety from different views, from an entrepreneurial way, from microbiology side, from a consultant, and from a regulatory side. And thank you all for being here and offering us your speck of knowledge today. And I think without you, this wouldn't be a success. And as the theme of Food Safety Day says that food safety is everyone's business, I think every stakeholder in the food supply chain, including consumer, including a farmer, including a supplier, to everyone, we all should work towards to a world that offers whole and safe food. So thank you all once again. So we also have one more session tomorrow, which will talk about fighting malnutrition through fortification and the regulation around it. So please do attend the session, which is happening around the same time, around 11 o'clock. And so also stay updated. To stay updated about our webinars, please don't forget to subscribe our channel. Please press that bell icon that is lower inside. And also please look into, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook as well, and you can also follow us on our domain, which is www.foodsafetyworks.com. And we provide end-to-end solutions for food safety, and we cover every food industry, from starting from catering to entrepreneurial startup companies to big companies as well. So to check out how we can help you on your journey, you can also subscribe to our newsletters as well. So while you are there, please don't forget about how important food safety is and how much you can contribute it. So thank you once again for joining. Have a great day and wishing you safe times again. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. BalKumar, Ms. Anusha, and Sarika. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.